The sky outside my window was the color of cold steel, typical Seattle morning gray and wet. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when the Slack message popped up. Quick sync, 8:30. Jeremy's office. No subject line, no context. Just a timestamp and a calendar block. Quick sync at Solvora Tech was code for something inconvenient. Not always bad. Sometimes annoying. But today, something in my gut twisted. I pressed my palms against my skirt, smoothing invisible wrinkles as I made my way down the corridor. The glass-walled offices felt colder than usual. The fluorescent lights hummed. Jeremy didn't even look up when I entered, just pointed at the chair across from him while scribbling something into a leather notebook. No greeting, no smile, just his pen moving and the soft tap of rain on the windows behind him. I sat. After a beat, he closed the notebook and finally looked at me. That polished corporate smile, the kind that ends 2 inches before the eyes spread across his face. "We're making strategic adjustments to staffing," he said. My stomach dropped, but I kept my posture straight. "We're asking all upper-level team members to accept a temporary 50% compensation adjustment, effective in 2 weeks. He slid a folder across the desk. I opened it and the number slapped me across the face. Half of my salary gone. Just like that. My throat tightened, but I made sure my voice stayed even. This is temporary. We're realigning budgets, cutting some fat. This isn't personal. He said that last line like he was doing me a favor. He knew I was a single mom. He knew my son Simon had a chronic condition that required monthly medication and a home breathing monitor. He knew about the therapy bills and the sleepless nights. And still here, he was telling me I was the fat. I locked my jaw and met his eyes. "I'll need one day." His brows arched slightly like he was surprised I hadn't snapped. "To consider the offer, to breathe," I said quietly, "and to read the fine print." I stood and walked out, spine straight, heels clicking. But by the time I reached my desk, my fingers were trembling too hard to hold my coffee. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I found myself parked behind a strip mall next to the loading dock of a grocery store I didn't shop at. The lot was half lit, the kind of place where no one asked questions if you sat in your car too long. I turned off the engine and let the silence settle. I tilted my seat back and stared at the ceiling. A patch of damp was spreading near the dome light. I started doing math, not the kind with numbers, the kind with dread. If I sold my car, I could make rent for 3 months, maybe 4, if I pawned the last of my jewelry. That bracelet my mother gave me when Simon was born. I could get a few hundred for it. I closed my eyes and pictured him, 10 years old, smart, literal, gentle. His bedtime routine was sacred vitamins at 8:15, breathing monitor checked at 8:20, a story about the stars at 8:30. He hated disruptions, hated uncertainty, and that's all I had to offer right now. I opened LinkedIn. Out of desperation or defiance, I wasn't sure. I hadn't touched the app in months. My inbox was a mess. Recruiter spam, outdated invites. But one message sat like a blinking light in the fog. Axel Rush, CEO Gradenics Energy Solutions. Subject line, great insights today. It was 3 months old. After a webinar I gave on high-stakes strategic pivots, he'd written, "Impressive thinking. Let's stay in touch." I had ignored it, out of loyalty. Loyalty that got me a 50% pay cut and a folder across the desk. Not tonight. I stared at the message until the cursor blinked like a dare. Then I typed, "I think it's time we talk." Sent. The screen stayed still for a beat. No response. Just the distant rattle of a shopping cart somewhere behind the store. I leaned my head back and exhaled into the darkness, the weight in my chest settling into something quiet, something cold, something almost focused. The reply came faster than I expected. "Can you meet in the morning?" 5 words. No fluff, no hesitation. My hands were still trembling when I read it. The glow of my phone casting long shadows across the inside of my car. I didn't answer right away. I drove home in silence, turned the lock softly, and tiptoed past Simon's room. He was still asleep, his chest rising with that familiar, rhythmic hum of the breathing monitor beside his bed. I couldn't sleep. I didn't try. I lay on the couch with my laptop resting on my thighs, half scrolling through job boards, half watching the blinking lights on the monitor across the hall. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that number again, 50%, seared onto the inside of my eyelids. At 5:50 a.m., another buzz. Axel again. Daily grind. Cafe. 8:30 a.m. Table by the window. I replied with one word, confirmed. At 7:15, Simon wandered into the kitchen, his hair a soft, unruly cloud. I made his usual breakfast and packed his lunch with extra care. At drop-off, I gave him a longer than usual hug. "Mama, people are staring," he whispered against my coat. "Good," I smiled. "Let them." At 8:10, I arrived at the cafe. The barista barely noticed me. I picked the table by the window. At 8:29 on the dot, Axel walked in sharp navy suit. No tie alert eyes. He greeted me with a calm, confident nod and sat down without small talk. I was hoping you'd say that he said as he reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. I opened it slowly. Director of Strategic Growth, $162,000 base. Full health coverage, dependents included. Equity. Flexibility. Remote options. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight. He leaned forward slightly. "This isn't charity," he said. "It's what you're worth." I closed the folder gently, but my fingers clung to the edges. As we stood to leave, I could already feel the weight of the folder in my bag, heavier than any resignation letter I'd ever written. I arrived at Solvoratech at 8:58 a.m., sharp riding the elevator in silence, with two engineers who made dry jokes about someone leaving a Keurig pod in the machine overnight. They didn't look at me. No one did. That was fine. The meeting was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. I walked into the conference room exactly on time. Jeremy was already seated, relaxed, spinning a pen between his fingers. Meredith from HR sat beside him, composed in that overly empathetic way HR professionals train into their faces. Stacy, Jeremy said, nodding toward the seat across from him, like he was doing me a favor. "Thanks for making time." I sat slowly, not responding. Meredith offered her usual neutral smile. "We're just here to finalize the revised compensation terms and support you during this transition." That word again. Support. I placed my bag on the floor, reached inside, and pulled out the folder Axel had given me. It made a soft thud on the table. I didn't open it yet. Just let it sit there between us like a second heart beating in the room. Jeremy's smile faltered. I opened the folder, turned it toward them, and slid it forward. "Here's my counteroffer," I said, "from someone who values me." Meredith blinked and leaned in. Jeremy glanced at the top line, his jaw tightened. "I'd also like to remind you," I continued, my voice steady, "that under my contract, any reduction in compensation exceeding 25% qualifies as constructive termination." I saw Meredith begin to leaf through her notes. "That entitles me to full severance, and no, I'm not obligated to stay for any handoff." Jeremy opened his mouth, then closed it. His knuckles had gone white around the pen. I stood. "Oh," I added, lifting my bag calmly, "and if you're wondering who's handling the Mendez account next quarter, you may want to ask Gradenics." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out without looking back, the door closing behind me with a soft finality. The sliding doors of Solvoratech closed behind me for the last time, and I stepped out into the crisp air like someone crossing a finish line alone. The folder in my bag felt heavier than it had that morning. My steps were measured heels clicking over the pavement of the parking garage. But by the time I reached my car, the adrenaline began to drain. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle. My knees wanted to fold. What if Axel changed his mind? What if HR hadn't processed anything? What if the entire folder had just been a nice gesture meant to flatter me into patience? I sat behind the wheel, staring at the windshield breath, held like it might keep the fear from spilling out. Then ping. I grabbed my phone. One new email. Subject, "Welcome to Gradenics. Body paperwork attached. Let us know if you have questions. Sender, HR onboarding, Gradenics Energy Solutions." I let out the air I'd been holding since the conference room. It was real. That afternoon, I picked up Saman from school earlier than usual. He was crouched near a bench, turning a smooth pebble in his hands, eyes narrowed like it was telling him secrets about the cosmos. He smiled when he saw me. "Mama, you're early. I thought we deserved ice cream." He didn't ask questions. We walked 2 blocks and sat on a bench, our cones dripping slowly into napkins. The day felt like it didn't know what to do with itself, half over half, uncertain. Later in the kitchen, he sat at the table while I rinsed dishes. I felt his eyes on me before he spoke. "Why are you wearing your brave face?" I turned, wiping my hands on a towel. His voice was small but steady. "I quit today," I said, "because I was being treated unfairly." He nodded slowly, as if cataloging that sentence for later, as if adding it to some internal definition of what it meant to choose yourself. He went back to spinning his pebble. I went back to watching him like my life depended on it. By the time I poured my second cup of coffee the next morning, I had 14 unread emails waiting for me. I skimmed past the Greedenix onboarding instructions and the digital benefits packet. 4 messages were from former clients, people I hadn't heard from in weeks, maybe months. Their tones varied, some polite, others blunt, but they all wanted to know the same thing. "Where are you now?" The one that stopped me cold came from Dominic Paz, head of the Mendoza Group, Solvora Tech's biggest account, the one I had nursed through 2 product delays and a near breakdown in contract renewal last year, the one I had held together with spreadsheets, late-night calls, and blind faith. "Jeremy told me you're gone. I'm not staying to be bounced around." "Where are you now?" I stared at the message, letting it sit for a moment, then typed, "Greedenix." It only took a minute for his reply to land. "Of course you are. Marcus has good instincts. We'll be in touch." That was it. No begging, no debate, just certainty. By mid-afternoon, my phone hadn't stopped buzzing. 5 more clients reached out, some via email, some through direct messages. One even left a voicemail saying, "Heard what happened?" Not surprised. "Where do we send the new contract?" Every call, every message echoed the same truth. We worked with you, not the company. Each sentence hit me like a slow-building wave. Not vindication exactly, something quieter, like confirmation that the years I spent working in the margins, calming clients, solving fires before they reached the boardroom, hadn't been invisible after all. The silence I'd walked through at Solvora Tech was cracking, and this time it wasn't my voice breaking. It was the system around them. By 3 p.m., I had to silence my phone to concentrate. At 3:08, a final message blinked across my screen from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. It simply read, "They're going to feel this." 3 weeks passed before I heard his voice. The name flashed on my screen like a bad memory, Gerald Hauer, Solvora Tech's CEO, the kind of man who delegated discomfort and never dialed unless something was on fire. I answered with a steady tone, even though my heart thudded like a warning. "Hello, Stacy Maria," he corrected too late. "Gerald here. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm at work." Yes, of course. I'll be brief. We've been made aware of recent transitions, particularly the shift in client portfolios. We'd like to open a conversation about re-engagement, restoring trust. His voice wavered on that last phrase like he was tasting it for the first time. I let a small laugh slip through. It wasn't cruel, just tired. "You didn't lose me the day I walked out," I said. "You lost me the day you priced me like I was disposable." I want to be clear, he started that. Certain personnel decisions, particularly from Jeremy, weren't reflective of senior leadership. There was pressure, misalignment in communication. I stopped him cold. "You built that culture. Don't act surprised when it spits out the people who carry it." He went quiet. Then, in a softened voice, "Surely there's a way forward." There isn't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You didn't just lose an employee, Gerald. You lost loyalty. And that's something you don't get to buy back with panic and promises. There was a beat of silence, then a weak, "We'll stay in touch then." "No need," I replied. I hung up gently, then let the quiet settle. My office at Grydenix felt still grounded. I reached for my water, took a slow sip, and turned back to my monitor. 5 new emails, 2 from internal teams. 1 from a client asking for onboarding documents, 1 from an old colleague with subject line thinking about making a move, and 1 from Axel Roche himself. The days at Grydenix moved fast, cleaner, sharper. People didn't hover. They came with purpose, stayed for precision, and left without ego. I'd expected to feel like a transplant for weeks, but the ground under me held firm. Like I hadn't just landed, I'd been rooted here all along. It was late when Axel stepped into my office. Most of the building had gone quiet, the only light spilling in from the hallway. I was still nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, eyes scanning over a transition plan I hadn't even been assigned. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, then finally spoke. "We didn't know what we were unlocking," he said, voice calm but deliberate. "The clients that follow you, it's shifting our entire positioning." I didn't respond. Just took another sip, letting the weight of his words settle. "If this keeps going," he continued, walking in, "we'll need to restructure teams around your portfolio. You're not a hire, Maria. You're a lever." The air around us held something I hadn't felt in years. Not praise, not attention, something deeper, recognition. He didn't ask for a response, but I gave one anyway, quiet, steady. "I didn't plan to burn their house down," I said. "I just wanted to build my own." He nodded once, then left me to my silence. I stared at the screen again, the transition plan forgotten for a moment. The numbers in the spreadsheet now felt different, less theoretical, more like the bones of something real, something mine. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to prove I belonged. I was starting to understand that I had always belonged. They had just been too small to hold me. The quiet didn't last long. My phone lit up with a message from the Grydenix marketing team. Media request came in. "Client wants you quoted in the joint press release." And before I could type a reply, my inbox refreshed again, this time with a subject line that made me freeze. Simon School Parent-Teacher Conference Reminder. Simon was already under the covers when I stepped into his room, the soft glow of his nightlight casting a circle of amber across his sheets. His telescope was angled precisely at the corner of the window where the stars might show themselves between clouds if he waited long enough. He'd spent the whole week learning the names of constellations. It gave him comfort, predictable patterns in an unpredictable world. I sat on the edge of his bed and ran my fingers through his curls, still damp from the shower. "Are you going to work again tomorrow?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Yes," I said, smoothing the blanket over his chest, "but I'll be back for dinner." He turned his face toward me. "Promise?" I kissed his forehead. "I promise." He nodded once and closed his eyes, a tiny smile lingering on his lips. I stayed a moment longer, listening to his breath, even out watching the quiet rise and fall of his chest. Then I left the door open a sliver, just how he liked it. Back in the living room, I opened my laptop. The screen burst to life with new notifications. I scanned through them, quickly meeting confirmations, budget approvals, a media quote request, but it was the personal emails that stopped me. The first was from Celia, a former coworker from Silvora Tech. They tried to cut me too. I didn't have the courage to walk. You did. Thank you for proving it's possible. The next was from a client I had onboarded 3 years ago. They said you were just a project manager. Turns out you were the project. I read it twice, slowly. Not for praise, but because it landed somewhere deep in the space where doubt used to live, where I had once quietly accepted being overlooked. It was never about revenge. Not really. It was about remembering my own value and making damn sure no one ever questioned it again. I closed the laptop gently and leaned back on the couch, eyes heavy, knowing tomorrow I'd face something else I hadn't seen coming. The glass doors to the Greidenix West conference room hissed open just after 9. My first official day as Vice President of Strategic Growth. No nerves, no theater. Just me walking into a space I had earned. 7 people stood when I entered. A subtle, unspoken gesture. Respect not for my title, but for what they'd seen me do before I had one. Axel made brief introductions. I shook hands, offered measured smiles. No need to prove anything. Not today. The onboarding schedule was full 6 new accounts, 3 of them direct competitors to my former portfolio. One client, still technically under contract with Solvora Tech, asked if I'd have time for a quick chat. I kept it polite. My job wasn't to poach. But if they reached out first, I didn't need to apologize. By noon, I had already drafted 2 strategic realignment memos, approved an expansion plan, and joined a crisis call for a project in Phoenix that wasn't even mine yet. I didn't have to step in, but I did. At 12:17, an email landed from an external consultant I barely knew. He worked at a competitor, someone who once sat across from me in a tense negotiation 3 years ago. Subject, well played. Body, you shifted the market. Quietly, but undeniably. I read it once, then again, and then closed the tab. During lunch, I sat alone at the long marble counter in the common space. I didn't check my phone. I didn't answer messages. I just thought. It had never really been about the money, not the number on a contract or the digits in a deposit. It was about who gets to decide what you're worth, and whether you ever say no when someone tries to convince you you're less than what you've built, less than what you carry, less than who you are. I closed my laptop slowly, the faint reflection of my face staring back at me in the screen. They said I was replaceable, I whispered. A pause. Turns out, I was unforgettable.